In the Middle East and religious tension elsewhere, new polling of Muslims here in America is getting especially close attention. The massive study by the Pew Research Center shows Muslims here are better assimilated in Europe and Britain, for example. They're wealthier and happier with this country. But there are some troubling items as well. 13% believe that suicide bombings are sometimes or often justified. And among Muslims in America younger than 30, that percentage hits 26%, which means 1 in 4 young American Muslims believe suicide bombings can be justified. We're getting reaction to that and the rest of the survey from as many angles as we can tonight, starting with CNN's Glenn Beck, who also hosts a nationally syndicated radio program. We spoke earlier. Glenn, what do you make of the study, this Pew study? 1 in 4 younger Muslims living here in America think that suicide bombings under some conditions are okay.
Doesn't unfortunately come as a surprise to me. It is exactly what happened in Europe. It's what's happened in England, and we're a country in denial. The good part of the study is that when you look at the community overall, also what people like me have been saying now since September 11th, that about 90% of Islam is good and peaceful here in America. I've always been saying that it's 10% that has turned extremist. This Pew Research study shows that it's about 13, but my gut apparently has a margin of error of 3 percentage points.
I mean, it's 82% Muslims who are 30 and older say suicide attacks are never warranted. There is a lot of good in the studies, you point out. I mean,
sure,
that the level of assimilation, the desire, the buying into the American dream is
sure,
very much alive in the Muslim community. But there does seem to be this difference between an older generation and a younger generation, and that's troubling.
Here's where it gets Anderson, because there's a couple of solutions as I see it. The first solution has to be, if you look at the same survey, it shows that about 40% of the entire Muslim community here in the United States says that Arabs were not involved in the 9/11 hijack.
I found that fascinating.
That is spooky, because that's where it begins. That is the water that waters these seeds that are going to grow into giant trees. The Muslim community must face reality, and they must teach their children.
Are you saying that what we're seeing happening in Western Europe is a harbinger of things to come here?
Absolutely. We are so fortunate to be protected by our oceans, and also to not be protected by this giant state that was living in denial for so long. We have a great country, and people can come here from other places and change their life, and a lot of immigrants of all faiths have done that. Many Muslims have done that, and they have lived here and they've assimilated. Over in Europe, what they did was they allowed the separation of these communities. They have no-go zones where the police don't even patrol in some of these Muslim communities, and they have Sharia law, at least the beginnings in most of these no-go zones, but they have full Sharia law in some areas in Europe, and that's going to lead to the destruction. You've got to assimilate, and you've got to be based in reality on what's happening on things like September 11th.
5% of Muslims here in America have a favorable view of al-Qaeda. One quarter surveyed really had no opinion whatsoever. How do you go about changing that? And a lot of the ones who had a favorable view of al-Qaeda were actually black Muslims, African Americans.
Yeah, I don't believe that 25% number. How do you not have an opinion on one of the biggest events of our movements of our day? I think that shows fear. It shows fear of the pollster, fear of, I don't know who's in my community, fear of the United States government, but that 25% number, I don't buy.
Glenn Beck, appreciate it.
Thanks, Anderson.
Different perspectives now. Joining me is Ahmed Yunus. He's the author of American Muslims Speak the Truth. Also with us is Asma Hassan, author of Why I Am a Muslim, an American Odyssey. Appreciate both of you taking the time to be on the program. Asma, let me start with you. 1 in 4 younger American Muslims think that suicide bombings under some conditions are okay. How can that be?
I know, and that's definitely a troubling thing to hear, especially for me as a Muslim. I think that we shouldn't overstate, again, remember that the vast majority of American Muslims don't ever think that it's justified. And I would offer that among all American young people, Muslim or non-Muslim, there is a fascination about violence. We are the video game generation. We grew up with violent video games and violent movies. So I can only offer that that plays a role. I mean, obviously, you know, we see it in the larger American community, and I think a lot of these questions that are controversial to us, if you went out into the larger American community and asked the same questions, you would probably get similar numbers, is my guess.
Ahmed, do you agree with that?
Absolutely. In an Ohio State April poll 2006, Americans were asked whether the United States government had a role to play in 9/11. 40% of respondents answered affirmatively. I don't agree with them, but the proposition that conspiracy theories as they relate to 9/11, which has become a very confusing issue for Americans generally, 9/11, the act, its relationship to the invasion of Afghanistan, its relationship to the war in Iraq, its relationship to the global war on terror, to the extent that the Department of State has issued a number of reports attempting to counter the conspiracy theories that exist. So what astonishes me is the similarity between the perspectives of young Muslims. For example, the percentage of young people that say that they are Muslim first and American second compared to the percentage of young evangelicals that say that they are Christian first and American second. Young black Muslim men saying they are disenfranchised, they can't find equal opportunities for achievement in America, compared to young black men in America per se that have the same perspective. So to me, the similarities are quite astonishing.
Without a doubt, there is cause for good news. There's certainly good news in this study in the level of assimilation, the buy-in to the American dream among the Muslim population. It's probably the best assimilated, best integrated Muslim population of any country in the world. And yet, Asma, 5% of Muslims here have a favorable view of Al-Qaeda.
I know, and again, another troubling number, but let's also not overstate this and remember that majority do not have a favorable view. And I, as a Muslim, I can tell you that Al-Qaeda has not been good for Muslims around the world, that Al-Qaeda has actually hurt Muslims. But I think what we're seeing here with that 5%, there is a frustration among American Muslims. How can we help our Muslim brothers and sisters around the world? What can we do? Giving to Muslim charities is basically impossible. Most Muslim organizations it's illegal to give to them from the American government. If there was a way that we could reach out and help, I think that would help this 5%, because basically what they're feeling is Al-Qaeda is the only person, the only organization doing anything about this problem and trying to help Muslims.
But I mean, that is just completely false, though. I mean, I understand that may be the belief of this 5%, but I mean, as you yourself stated, Al-Qaeda is anti-Muslim. I mean, they're Salafists. They hate moderate Muslims more than they probably hate America. So the notion that I mean, the people that they are killing by and large in Afghanistan and Iraq are Muslims.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think what you're hearing from this 5%, I mean, some of it is going to be, in any survey, you're going to have a fringe. You're definitely going to have young people who are going to show some bravado. It's a phone survey, and it can't be the most comprehensive. I think if you ask these people one-on-one, I don't know how many would stick with that view. And again, I can only say that outside, in the American community, the larger American community, I don't know that we wouldn't necessarily have similar views.
Two things real quickly, Anderson. Symbolism always trumps substance when we talk about young Muslims, and one of the things that Muslims always say in America is we need an organic cadre of homegrown religious leaders that can counter the religious ideology that's being propagated by extremists around the world. Those religious leaders, those imams, being organic to America and the American experience, in allowing them to be relevant to these young Muslims that have these very serious
And does that
concerns.
not exist?
It absolutely exists, but it needs to exist at a much more proliferated extent. For example, the Zaytuna Institute in San Francisco, run by Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, is putting together a very impressive seminary that is perceived by the global Muslim community of scholars as being authentic and traditional and legitimate.
You had a second point which you wanted to make, and we're almost out of time. So.
Sure. I think we see that assimilation, multiculturalism, the European model of integration has failed, and pluralism and diversity, and the American model of identities that come together on a founding core of principles has clearly succeeded. And what we're seeing in the polls is what we were expecting and inclined to believe, and is very, very positive, that American Muslims for the most part are socially and economically integrated. They believe that there is a bit more to go in terms of a full economic integration, and we're moving on the right path, and we need a bit more analysis.
Well, let's hope that the positive message coming out of this Pew Research study gets out to the wider Muslim world to show the situation in the United States, the success that Muslims have had. Ahmed Yunus, we'd love to have you back on, and Asma Hassan as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.